office at Lazarus House. A converted closet, to be exact, but it has an amazing view. I see lots of things happen across the street at the front door. Donations being dropped off, volunteers ringing the doorbell, first responders attending to our guests. When I work at night, the view is less, except for the one porch light. It was under this light that I first saw Sophia.
I had no idea what to expect when I was ushered into a sterile conference room. At Elgin Mental Health Hospital, behind a series of security doors, the prospect of intentionally meeting someone who had just recently tried to take his own life was not something that I had thought about when I had started at Lazarus House. This is where I met John.
A man had reached the end of his rope. Prior to arriving at the house, he had been living in his car for several days before reluctantly deciding that living in the house with others was better than remaining alone in his car. I didn't have a choice. I had to leave and come here. What happened to me ruined my life. It was in this state that I met Marcus in my office.
John took the chair across from me. He was ordinary. He was very open about how he had attempted to take his life. He'd been living in a rental house for a friend in exchange for maintenance while he was running his handyman business. The business had dried up the previous fall. He had drunk more and more alcohol. He needed help.
Dropped off in front of Lazarus House, illuminated under the porch light, was one mom, one infant, one young girl, and 6 white garbage bags. I wondered how she decided what went into those bags and what she had to leave behind.
30 years ago, Marcus had served in the army and had awoken in the barracks to find himself being sexually assaulted by his comrade. After this, he explained, he had developed post-traumatic stress disorder, which resulted in him being discharged. As this traumatized, frustrated, and angry veteran opened up, I held out hope that our house could become the source of support he needed.
Within the first 2 weeks of being at Lazarus House, John reinvigorated his remodel handyman business. He did this without a driver's license. He had lost it due to DUI convictions.
Sophia's voice was soft and insecure, and she seemed so scared and timid. Her face was streaked with tears and mascara. She broke down, telling me that at the last minute, her husband wouldn't allow their other 2 children to go with her. We went into the playroom to do the intake paperwork. Sophia sat in the comfy chair while the baby slept, and her 9-year-old daughter stood next to Sophia, clinging onto her arm.
Marcus was angry, which led him to cause a disturbance for others in the house. I met with him to find a way to bring these issues to me and address these frustrations before he spiraled. He wanted our help.
Help. It looks different for each guest. Anytime I could walk alongside Sophia in support felt like a real privilege. Early on, I remember sitting in a hotel lobby with Sophia. We heard her name being called to go into the manager's office for her first official job interview. Being new to the process, panic went over her face when she realized that she would be going in alone. I never thought to tell her this ahead of time. I got up and whispered in Spanish, "Creo en ti," I believe in you. I remember watching her walk away as she kept looking back at me. And I saw someone so brave.
John was always proud of getting another job. We helped him with his business accounting, tracking jobs, and spending. He was so focused on his business, he thought his past alcohol abuse would take care of himself. At my behest, John went to the Lorenz Addiction Center.
When I handed Marcus our tool to track his spending, he asked, "So, you're basically giving me this to keep track of my money, because I'm like a kid who doesn't know how to do that myself. That's what mental illness does to me," he continued. "It makes me think like a kid. I can't control my impulses and I spend everything. This sheet will help me think like an adult and keep track of what I'm spending. I need this."
John was reluctant to get an assessment or to follow the recommendations. After time and a little push, he saw the benefit. He even figured out how he could get transportation to and from his treatments covered. He was proud of this. He also began to grow his business, and he became a contractor for Home Depot, getting more work.
Months later, I looked out my window to see Sophia, but in a much different way than that first night. This time, she was dragging out of the Uber one huge black garbage bag and a bulky vacuum cleaner. Her face was so bright when she approached my window. That's the best part about knowing Sophia. She invites you to take part in those little moments of joy. She opened up the bag so I could look inside. It was filled with brand new cleaning supplies. Sophia was returning from her very first house cleaning client. This side business had been a dream of hers for so long, and nothing had stopped it. Not having her own car, or a fancy cleaning caddy to hold her supplies, or perfect English. I felt so much respect for Sophia at that moment. I knew that I had just been witness to someone's triumph.
Weekly, I helped Marcus track every cent in his budget and save for his eventual move out of our house. We also worked together to put him in touch with a local mental health clinic to address his struggles with mental illness. I felt encouraged by his progress. We built a relationship between him and a social worker from the Veterans Administration who was able to identify benefits he could use to move out of the house.
After John's initial reluctance to counseling, he began to see the value of the counseling and is still one of their model clients. His story was featured in the Daily Herald this last summer, supporting the work of the counseling program. And he actively supports others who struggle with alcohol or substance abuse issues.
While Marcus and I met with the VA social worker to discuss this option, his defensive and stubborn tendencies reappeared. He'd come to enjoy the house and our support so much that he did not want to leave just yet. I convinced him it was best to take advantage of these benefits and move out the following month. With still some reluctance, he ultimately trusted me and agreed.
I think we will all remember the day that Sophia walked out our door to a huge surprise. The first thing she saw was a giant red bow. This bow was sitting on top of her new minivan, a gift from a generous donor. This meant no more Ubers. Sophia was so appreciative, and we all could feel her gratitude. That night, I happened to glance in the playroom. Sophia was there, sitting in the same chair she had sat on that cold January night when she first arrived. And just like that night, there were tears running down her face. In a strong, clear voice, Sophia said, "I wanted to come back to this chair, this room where it all first began. I wanted to remember how I felt that night, who I was then, and who I am now. I want to keep doing better."
In his final month, Marcus's enthusiasm for case management and the house itself persisted. In the heat of summer, a man who had wanted nothing to do with the shelter was now power washing it clean with the other guests. After seeing the outside of our house cleaned by this man, I knew the anger was gone. During our weekly meetings, we focused on finding a place for him to live. I was excited for him. As the end of the month came, he found an apartment, and thus we had our final case management meeting. He thanked me and shook my hand. I feel like I've got a whole new outlook on life now. I'm really doing great, aren't I?
Last September, John petitioned to get his driver's license reinstated. He had a formal hearing the next month. He was well supported with a legal counsel, professional treatment, and I provided him with a letter of support that verified over 16 months of sobriety.
Today, Marcus remains in his new home. He continues his work as a self-employed painter and enjoys this new life he found while staying at our house. My time spent working with him has made me grateful and enthusiastic for the mission of our house in providing support, love, and grace for all who come through our doors.
I met Sophia 2 years ago. Last week, I was in my office and I saw her waiting outside the door. When I opened it, she literally burst through. "Las llaves, Wendy, las llaves." Keys. She was receiving keys the following day. Her name had finally come up on the subsidized housing list. She was moving into a house, her very first home, with all 4 of her children. I wish everyone could have seen the look on her face that night. I was so choked up. I couldn't say anything. We stood there in tears, in silence, not as a case manager and shelter guest, but just as 2 women. Her moment had arrived, and she invited me to share that with her. She gave so much thanks to God and everyone at Lazarus' house. And then she said, "Now I can make you guacamole in my own kitchen, because mi casa es su casa."
Last month, the counselors who he had resisted asked John to be the client who played Santa Claus at their client family Christmas party. At the time, John did not know that he was going to receive his own Christmas gift that a few days later. He was granted limited driving privileges for work. I assume far greater things are ahead of him as he continues on his journey, his story.
Every day we are working with people who have a story. Stories that are sad, tragic, heartbreaking, frustrating, admirable, inspiring. Our jobs are hard. Stories like John, Marcus, and Sophia don't come along often. So when they do, we hang on to them We savor them, and we are grateful. Grateful to have been witness to watching their journeys unfold. Grateful to be included in their little moments. Grateful that it all happens here at Lazarus.